So really excited to bring you the episode with Benedikt Bünz today. He is the chief scientist over at Espresso Systems. Now, last November, I had on Mike Mosier. He is the former FinCEN director, and he's with Espresso Systems as well on the team to talk about FATF's recent virtual asset provider release. That was last November. That seems like 10 years ago, right? Particularly after the events of this past week with Celsius and also three hours capital bringing down the market effectively, and of course contributed to by the Federal Reserve. So when I found out that Benedikt was on the team, I was super excited. I said, wow, this is serious. So I'm really excited to bring this podcast because it allows me to do a deep dive on zero knowledge proofs, which is something that after all these episodes, I really haven't done the deep dive. So, and then we can also get into some really cool things that Espresso is doing with scalability and configurable privacy. This is very exciting stuff. They're cutting edge. I'm a super big fan of the project. And again, I made a reference to the fact that this intro is being done on June the 16th. And so there's plenty of commentary out there about what's going on. Certainly encourage people to keep their head about them. But in at a future episode, I would like to do a retrospective and tease out what it really means in the long term, not now because there's too much noise. And there's plenty of places you can go for the real-time stuff. This podcast has a different focus. But I will say this. A lot of people in the space often comment that 95% of the projects today, the coins, won't be here in 5 years or sooner. People have different handicaps on that time. But as my client put to me, no one is really quite prepared for how we get there, that process. And that process can be painful. This week can be part of that process. And I hate to say it, but there's probably more of that process to come. But that doesn't mean that everything's crumbling. It just means that a lot of things are happening at once, and it's going to take a while to sort itself out. But on this show, we don't really focus on events like this. We focus more on what's next and ways to think about the future, which I think is as important now as it is, as it's ever been. So if you look back at all the episodes that we've had on the encrypted economy, it's about building this encrypted economy. And we get into substance. We don't really get into hype. We don't get into token projects or like why something on a moon. We've never done that. In fact, I don't consider this a crypto podcast at all. I constantly say this. It is about encryption and how there is an economy building around encryption. And what we discuss on this podcast is going to endure. And at the very least, what you're going to learn here is going to better prepare you for what's next. So with that, I actually encourage you to share it with others who you think will benefit. In fact, maybe they need it. Maybe they're too focused on the now and the current market movements. Maybe they need to take a step back and start to think about, hey, what are the podcasts that are about building? What podcasts are about the future? How we get there? Building the encrypted economy. So there's my pitch. Take in this episode. This is a great episode. Open your mind. Hope you learn a lot. And we got a bunch more coming like this, building into the future. So really excited to bring you Benedikt Bünz of Espresso Systems. Enjoy. Welcome to The Encrypted Economy, a weekly podcast featuring discussions exploring the business, laws, regulation, security, and technologies relating to digital assets and data. I am Eric Hess, founder of Hess Legal Counsel. I've spent decades representing regulated exchanges, broker-dealers, investment advisors, and all manner of fintech companies for all things touching electronic trading with a focus on new and developing technologies. So today on The Encrypted Economy, super excited to have Benedikt Bünz on the podcast. He's the chief scientist over at Espresso, which we'll be talking about. We had Mike Mosier on the podcast I guess a number of episodes ago, and we were talking about a stealth project that he was involved in, and that stealth project was in fact Espresso. And I'm a fan of Benedikts. When Michael told me that Benedikt was associated with the project, I was like, no way! I'm like, this is great. And I got on the call, and Benedikt was on the call. And I was just so excited. I was talking about bulletproofs and the stuff that he wrote, and I was going on and on and on about it. I got to admit, I'm a bit of a fan. So, he's Benedikt's been involved in a lot of projects, a lot of research, and it's been exciting to see what he's been working on and how he's moved from project to project. So definitely somebody to keep an eye on in the space. And today we have him on the podcast. So Benedikt, welcome.
Welcome. That's quite the introduction. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I know. So So let's start out a little bit with your background. And I know there's some recent news that you joined the A16Z crypto research team, which is not in lieu of, it's just another project that you're associated with. We're talking finishing up his PhD. So, when outside of 24 hours a day, like, where do you spend your time? Anyway, why don't you get a bit of background, and we'll before we kick off into it.
Right, yeah. So my name is Benedikt Bünz. For the last couple of years, I've spent most of my time I'm a researcher, I'm an academic, so I spent most of my time at Stanford, finishing up my PhD in the applied cryptography group there. By applied cryptography, really, it's about I worked on the underlying techniques of blockchain, such as zero-knowledge proofs, and some of the stuff that we might get into. And one of the things that we did about now it's almost 1.5 years ago, together with Ben Fish and others, and Charles Liu. Ben Fish is they also did their PhDs at Stanford. We founded Espresso Systems, which we'll talk about a little bit today. And there I'm the chief scientist, so again working kind of on the hardcore research there. And I'm also now finishing up my PhD. Finally, it's been a great time, but I think it's time to move on. And I'll start also working with this a very exciting research lab that Andreessen Horowitz, or A16Z, is building. And the goal of this research lab is really to be kind of like a high-tech research lab. Has amazing academics who are there for the blockchain crypto space. Kind of like the comparison that they always use, which I think is a very high bar, but maybe I hope that we can achieve it. There's this lab called DeepMind, which is does a lot of things for artificial intelligence, and kind of the equivalent of that for crypto is what we want to build there.
Excellent. So before we get into it, and you knew I was going to ask you for this, let's start off with the high level of the various zero knowledge proofs. I know you've done this before, but on this podcast, you might have some people that have to kind of get caught up. Start off with ZK and Optimistic, and then maybe hitting on Snark, Stark, Bulletproof, and last but by far not the least, Planck.
Right. I think, maybe it's even better to start off with what the heck is even a zero knowledge proof, right? I think, that's always a good point to start, even if you've heard it before. So zero knowledge proofs have kind of two amazing properties. So at a very high level, they allow you to show that something is true without revealing why it's true. So how does this help, or what does this mean? Well, for example, I can have a transaction, an encrypted transaction, such that no one can see, only the sender and receiver can see the contents of the transaction. But I can, then how do I verify that, for example, the sender actually had enough money to send this transaction? Well, this is where zero knowledge proofs come in, where I can give you a zero knowledge proof that the transaction is valid. And after reading this proof, you'll be convinced that the transaction is valid, but you have no idea why it is valid. So for example, you have no idea how much money was being transferred. So this is a great tool for privacy. The amazing thing is that these same tools, these zero knowledge proofs, sometimes also referred to as ZK snarks, we can go into the classification in a second, that they also have another property, which is that I can prove to you that some really, really complex transaction or some complex computation, that takes an hour, an hour to do, say, I can prove to you that this computation was done correctly. And then checking the proof is much, much faster than redoing the computation. So for example, this is being used in something called rollups, something that we're also now working on at Espresso System, where I can prove to you, where I can take a bunch of transactions, and instead of everybody in the blockchain system having to verify all of these transactions, I give you one proof, one short proof, it's also really, really short, that all of these transactions are valid, and all you need to do is check the validity of the proof, which is much more efficient than checking all of the transactions. So it's a tool for both privacy and for scalability.
Awesome. So then I guess we'll take our next baby step. Basically the different rollups before diving into the, snarks, starks, bulletproofs, etc.
So there's many different, I guess, there's many different proof systems. So these are different, just like how there's many different browsers or how there's many different, I don't know, right? Like one is the class, like, a zero knowledge proof, or and one, then there's kind of, like brand name, almost instantiations of it, and they have different properties. So for example, I've worked on bulletproofs, which is particularly efficient for these, for basically this privacy aspect of proving that a transaction is valid without revealing, the amounts. And that, for example, is being used in Monero for privacy. And then there's other proof systems like Starkware has, Starks is a proof system developed by Starkware, which, it's better on some efficiency metrics. So there's basically all of these efficiency metrics, like how hard is it to create a proof, how hard is it to verify it, how big is the proof, all of these dimensions. And that's why there's sort of many different proof systems which are optimal for different applications. I think, honestly, I know people love to focus on the differences. I think they're not that important. I think it's much more important to understand how these proofs I say that while most of my work is on trying to develop new and better proof systems, right? Like for me, it's very important. But I think for the general users of blockchains and people trying to understand the space, it's more important to understand at a high level what these proof systems does, rather than trying to understand the distinct differences. And there's different ones work basically better for different applications.
Right. But so maybe instead of going into each and every one, maybe just do a little deeper dive on the specific trade-offs across each. I think you kind of referred to it, but
right.
Yeah.
Right. So the trade-offs are, I guess there's, a couple of dimensions which are really important. So one of them is it seems to be the case that for example, for scaling, so taking a bunch of transactions and creating one proof out of, that all of these transactions are valid. So for rollups, it seems like that maybe it's okay to have a slightly larger proof size if the prover is, if in turn the prover is much faster. So, there seems to be a trade-off, basically a little bit faster provers. So being able to create a proof for more transactions or doing this faster, seems to lead, the proof systems that are better on that, they seem to have better, they seem to have slightly larger proofs. So for example, Stark is an example of that. The other one, another dimension is that we have very efficient and good proof systems, but some of them use something that is called a trusted setup. So some of these these snarks, these pairing-based snarks, they use a so-called trusted setup. And what that means is that there's a party that has to create the proving key and the verification key. So the prover has a proving key and the verifier has a verification key. And if the party who creates that is somehow, they use some secret, some secret randomness, and afterwards they should discard that. They should destroy, ideally destroy the hard drive that they use, such that no one can recover this. The problem is if they don't do that, or if they're malicious, then they can actually break the proof system. So they can prove to you that 2 + 2 is equal to 5, or that a transaction that, creates money out of thin air is valid. And this is of course something that ideally, especially in a blockchain setting, you shouldn't want to have. It's much better to not have such a trusted setup. And that was one of the reasons why we developed bulletproofs, because it was a very efficient proof system that does not rely on such a trusted setup. versus, for example, the proof system used in Zcash, relies on such a trusted setup, and they actually had an issue where they had to disclose a vulnerability such that we don't think it was exploited, but like there was a significant issue with this trusted setup, and it just shows you the danger of these things. And as cryptographers, we work really hard on trying to minimize the risks there, and for example, develop proof systems without trusted setup.
And is this the trusted setup distinct from what goes into a optimistic rollup? Because there you're rolling up a number of different transactions at once, and so there's a delay.
So there's two kinds of. So this is now on the rollup side. So rollups are about combining transactions and trying to verify all of these transactions at once.
Right. So when you're just to be just for clarification, so the what you were talking about with the trusted setup really goes to the zero knowledge proof itself.
This is in the zero knowledge proof itself
versus the rollup. Okay.
Yeah. So in the rollup, there's two. Basically, right now we know kind of two variants of rollups. We know ZK rollup, which uses one of these zero knowledge proof systems that I've talked about. Like Starks or some variants of Snarks, or Planck. Is a very seems to be one that is really, really has a lot of good applications right now. So that is ZK rollup. So you prove that all of these transactions are valid. And optimistic rollup works slightly different. It doesn't actually use zero knowledge proofs, which has, and I'll talk about the trade-offs in a second. But the idea of optimistic rollup is that I'm just going to claim that all of these transactions are valid, and no one is going to verify. But then afterwards, it basically says instead of immediately everybody verifies, it says that we can do fraud proofs, so that then someone checks the transactions, and if they discover a mistake, if one of the transactions isn't valid, then basically there is a mechanism such that they can point out this transaction was invalid, and there's some economic incentives and a system built in place such that the person who claimed that a transaction was invalid when was valid when in fact was invalid is getting punished, sort of they have to pay some fine or they get slashed some amount. So that is optimistic rollup. So optimistic rollup does not use zero knowledge proofs, and the benefit of that is that so the big benefit of optimistic rollup is that at least today it is sort of much faster, and you can take more transactions and aggregate them at once. It really is quite efficient, and you can do this with very complicated transactions. And the downside, the big downside of optimistic rollup is that when I see a transaction in such a rollup, I'm not sure yet whether it's valid, right? I need to wait, it's like up to a week for because there's this challenge period. Someone might challenge this block and say like, oh, here there was a transaction that is invalid, and that really creates complications, and like you have to wait basically a whole week in order to get your funds out of the rollup. And personally, I think that optimistic rollups I think it's great to have a diversity of ideas. We should have as many ideas as possible. But I personally think that optimistic rollups are good right now. But I don't know. I think ZK rollups are getting better and better and better, and the zero knowledge proof systems are getting better. And I really think that this is where the future is heading. But I've been,
it's actually interesting because I've heard a lot of I've heard a lot about the ZK rollup and the optimistic rollup, and every time I hear it, I think to myself, well, how is optimistic rollups the future? But I'll ask you, like, what does optimistic, going forward from here? There's a lot of, I agree with you. I mean, you definitely hear a lot about the big improvements being made in zero knowledge proofs. The question is what continues to make sense for optimistic rollups?
I mean, optimistic rollups make a lot of sense right now. I think that, there's always, like, you have to think about the now and today, simply because they're the only system that, so with the ZK rollups, we can right now roll up simple transfers of value. So, or like, there's like decentralized exchanges, but basically simple, like, I just send you some money. But we know that blockchains have much more complicated smart contracts, for example, right? Which do much more complicated computations. And we don't yet have, but this is, for example, something that at Espresso Systems we're working on, we don't yet have good rollups for arbitrary smart contracts. That's just a ZK rollup, sorry. We don't have ZK rollups for arbitrary smart contracts, but we have optimistic rollups for arbitrary smart contracts. So in the now and day, if you want to roll up smart contracts, if you want to roll up complicated transactions, it's not that, one is better than the other. It's that optimistic rollup works and ZK rollup does not yet work. And I guess the big question is whether, I think that, like, if we had the amazing ZK rollup and everything was there, then it would be clear that we would take it. It's basically the question, I guess if I was an optimistic rollup person, I would say it's like the fusion of, the like fusion energy, which is always like 30 years away, no matter what you ask. I personally obviously don't think so. I'm an, no pun intended, but I'm an optimist in that regard, like that, ZK rollups will get better and better. But, certainly we need solutions now. And who knows, right? Like, it could be that optimistic rollups are always, slightly more efficient. They just have this large delay period. So yeah, I don't know. It's really like, the space is so exciting because so much innovation is happening, and it's really hard to see, where the space is going to be in 5 years. But yeah, I'm a big optimist on ZK rollups.
Right. And so you mentioned Planck and your confidence level in Planck, and I've also heard a number of other projects express a lot of confidence in Planck. So maybe you could, what makes it so exciting?
Yeah, I think that Planck seems to sit in a sweet spot of, kind of like very efficient verification, very small proofs. But like one of the things that, so Planck is actually, there's kind of, these proof systems are nowadays like kind of set up out of multiple components. So there's basically two components. One of them is that I always talk, we do a proof system for some computation, right? So like normally a computation can be expressed in many different ways. For example, it can be written in Python. It can be written in C++. It can be written in the assembly code that your computer actually interprets. And then there's different compilation steps from, one of these higher level representations of a program, of a computation, to a lower level representation. And kind of the same thing has started to exist for these proof systems. And Planck is really, the main component of Planck is a slightly different kind of programming language for how I express computations. So instead of, like, I don't know, C, it uses like something, I don't know, C++. And it is a really, interesting and flexible like representation of how I, how I represent computations. Uses something with the simplest way that these proof systems used to express computations is just as multiplications and additions. So if I want to do anything, I have to write it as a bunch of multiplications and additions. And we know actually that anything I want to compute, I can write as multiplications and additions, because that's literally what your CPU does. But, it's helpful to have kind of, more expressive or more intermediate gates. Like, for example, I might want to do a hash functions are really important, or, other operations. or an if gate, or there's kind of different operations that I might want to do. And Planck basically allows you to build these custom gates, is what they're called, very efficiently, and really gives a lot more flexibility, which allows people to design really elegant solutions and things around it. And it's really become almost like not just one proof system, but a family of proof systems that all use this kind of same higher level Planck language.
Excellent. So the encrypted economy covers a lot of the technology for homomorphic encryption, secure multi-party computation, even trusted execution environments. But basically, technologies that tend to be working off of very large data sets and large computations. But when you're talking about the multiplication and addition, I immediately snap into that's like a fully homomorphic concept versus like a partial homomorphic concept is like just pluses and minuses. So question, what I find interesting is trying to understand where these two worlds actually intersect. And because oftentimes you have conversations with people and they're very deep in the weeds on zero knowledge, and then you have conversations with people who are very involved in secure multi-party computation and homomorphic encryption, and zero knowledge doesn't really come up too much. And yet they seem sort of, in many ways, they're both relating to encryption, very different types of objectives. But I guess the question is how do you see them intersecting, or is that something you not even think about?
No, of course I think about that, and they're all. I think they're actually all they all intersect in many different ways in both the tools that they use, sort of underneath the hood. For example, a lot of zero knowledge proofs use they use homomorphic encryption to do the additions much more efficiently. So for example, in these zero knowledge proofs, oftentimes, this is of course simplifying, additions are very easy because we have good homomorphic, additive homomorphic encryption, which allows you to do additions and subtractions very, very efficiently. So, if I want to add two vectors, that's very easily done. What's a little bit harder and where we have to work a little bit harder are the multiplications. So usually, for example, we measure the complexity of these zero knowledge proof systems in the number of multiplications, not in the number of additions. And the reason is really because we have good additive homomorphic encryption, additions, but we don't have as powerful multiplicative homomorphic encryption. This is these are just ways where really, when you go deep into the weeds, these things intersect. With multi-party computation, for example, you can think of zero knowledge proofs as a very special kind. There's also many intersections, but you can think of zero knowledge proofs as a very special kind of multi-party computation, where the computation is basically that the prover proofs that some statement is true, and you can cast that as a multi-party computation. And there's also some proof systems which are built based of multi-party computation. Usually the advantages of those, they're very large, so I don't think they're very good for the blockchain space. But the advantage of those is that they're one big dimension that I didn't mention in the proof systems is the security against so-called quantum computers. So whenever you talk to cryptographers, at some point, quantum computers come up, because a lot of the cryptography that we've built over the last 30, 40 years is not secure against quantum computers. But now, and we don't have quantum computers yet, but if they ever come online, they can factor integers, which breaks a lot of our computation. And then that's a big danger. And so, for example, these zero knowledge proof systems that are built from MPC, multi-party computation, they're actually, you can build proof systems that are secure against quantum computers, which is really exciting. They're just not as efficient yet as the ones that we use today.
And while we're on it, and maybe for some this is going down the rabbit hole, but I always challenge my listeners a bit on these podcasts, so it's they're used to it. So I've had Brett Hemingway Falk on a number of times, and we've talked. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's University of Pennsylvania professor, and we've talked just about the value of trusted execution environments and how it's sort of almost like a dirty way or a cheap way of getting a lot of the benefits of homomorphic encryption without necessarily implementing a fully homomorphic encrypted system, or like using the SGX from Intel. Is this something that you deploy, like when you're implementing the systems that leverage Planck? Is that the way? Is that something that actually works, or are there system or technical limitations against using those kind of environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest limitation, I think it really depends on the application. Trusted execution is kind of the cryptographer's cheat code, because it can do almost everything really fast, that cryptography can do. But it has one huge caveat, which is that it's it's really difficult. It's like almost impossible to get totally right. So, for example, with Intel SGX, which is one of these trusted executions, there's like every year at the security conferences, there's some bugs, that say like, oh, we've completely broken it. And that's the danger, right? And I think it really depends on your application whether it makes sense to use trusted execution. Would I rely my blockchain on trusted execution, where if any person can find any bug in this, like, and it's really like it's a completely different attack model, in that what trusted execution says is that the attacker has physical access, right? Like they can crack open their laptop or their server, and they can like literally, and they can buy as many of them as they want to. And they can see the chips and can do, there's like laser attacks and electric, there's crazy stuff that people can do. And they say even still, they shouldn't be able to, extract some key, there's some secret key embedded on this hardware. And basically, what Intel is claiming with SGX is that even though someone has access, like physical access to it, and can run programs on it and everything, they cannot extract this key. And that's very different from me saying I cannot extract your key, where you sit behind a firewall on the other side of the world, I still, maybe through an internet connection, maybe a hacker has a chance, but it's much harder for an attacker, right? It's a completely different game. So, and it's turned out like many times that it's really, there's someone is able to extract such a key, and then, Intel does some update, and then in the next version, it gets harder. So all this being said is I don't trust trusted hardware, for example, for an application like a blockchain, because what this would mean is that if anybody at anywhere in the world can break any of these chips, the system is completely like is useless, is broken. They can steal all the money. What I do think it is useful for, and what it is being used for, is, for example, what is it's if someone has a huge incentives to break these things, they can break them. But for example, if you want to store some sensitive information on your phone, like your wallet, like for wallet management, I think it's a really good application. The problem with wallet management is that, you want to run your wallet on your phone in some secure manner, but you also run a bunch of other apps on your phone, and you want to have an added layer of security such that these other apps cannot somehow get your private, say you installed a malicious app, right? And I think these kinds of applications and stuff related to that, also making it easier to manage keys, right? People are really, really bad at managing, like they forget their own passwords, right? So like managing passwords, managing keys, really hard for users. And I think that trusted hardware has a lot of roles in kind of these applications where it's also like if one of them breaks, then like one user loses their money, right? Like if you can break one trusted hardware there, then I can maybe steal the money of one user, which is bad, is something that we don't want, but it doesn't mean that the entire like blockchain or the entire system goes down. So I would trust it for like an individual person's security where they can also opt in to use it or not use it, but I wouldn't trust it for the entire system's security.
So the wallet application is something where you have the what was it, Multi-Party Computation Alliance, or the MPC, and that the membership there has like doubled or plus, and it's all been from firms that are exploring the enterprise wallet management, like Unbounded Technologies. We had Nigel Smart on the podcast a while ago before I guess they were acquired by Coinbase. So big deal there. So the wallet side of it has been explored in detail. What do you think? I'm going to press it a little bit. Just speculate. What would you see as the next application, the most logical application of intersecting, what I'll just call generally sort of the blockchain space? We'll just keep it very wide, with like these homomorphically encrypted or the combination of homomorphic encryption with secure multi-party computation, or secure multi-party computation with other encryption primitives. What would be your take?
Yeah, I mean, sort of one, I guess one application that is sort of not that far yet from the wallet application, but like sort of an extension of it, is that, it used to be that the idea of a wallet is you create your key, you create your key, you put it somewhere in, like you literally put it on a piece of paper in like cold storage, can't be accessed, and only when you want to move the money, which happens like once a year or something, you get it out through some complex security measurement and, something like that. This is true for a lot of applications, like say if I have Bitcoin keys, but this isn't necessarily true anymore in a world of DeFi, where people want to do things with their crypto, right? Like they want to, trade it, they want to, yield farm, they want to do different things of it. And for that, they need to access their private keys many times, and maybe in kind of different complicated ways. And that actually makes kind of the MPC application more interesting, because it's sort of, very different from, I just once in a blue moon, I need to reconstruct it, to send the money, or I need to constantly have basically access to these private keys. That's certainly much more of an evolution on this technology. My friend Dima Kogan at Arnak, I think they're working on something like that. I'm happy to connect you if you want to have him on. He's also from the same. He also did the PhD in the same group. There's a whole armada of people. So the other application, that I think is more long term, but is really exciting, is kind of these very private, I guess. Like one thing that like very private smart contracts, where, for example, I want to play, I don't know, like a fun one is like, we want to play, let me see how this, we want to play, like we want to compute something on the blockchain together, but we don't even want the blockchain to see the smart contract. So for example, one interesting one would be, like say we run an auction on a blockchain between many different parties, and we want that, like in theory with MPC, what you can do is you run an auction, and the winner knows, say it's an I don't know, some like, there's different kinds of auction, like an ascending auction, or but yeah, there's different kinds of auctions. But say we run an auction, and we could have an auction such that the winner knows that they've won, obviously, and they know how much they pay, and the seller knows how much they're selling it for, but or the auctioneer knows how much the winning bid was, but no one else learns any information. So for example, you don't know how much the other people bid, you don't know how much, like say there's so-called second price auctions where you bid something, but what you pay is actually the bid of the second highest bid, so you wouldn't maybe even know how much the winner bid. And like all of these informations we can keep private and run this as an auction on a blockchain. And at the end of the day, we still, get to run this auction and have a winner. And I think, applications like that really involve different parties and, something that they want to do together and something that they want to keep private, that could be kind of the next frontier.
Exciting. All right. So just about 40 minutes in, I want to talk about espresso now. I think everybody knew that I was going to, dive into this into that first part with you. So, but let's start switching over to espresso, because that's an exciting project for sure. And so let's talk about the problems. Let's talk about what espresso is and what kind of problems it's trying to address.
Right. It's so espresso is really, it's I enjoy talking about the first part because it also is, highly related to what we do at Espresso Systems. So it's really, a single shot solution for both privacy and scalability. And
that's pun intended, right?
Yeah, of course. But it's and it heavily relies on, we're world experts in these zero knowledge proofs, and it really relies on in these ZK snarks. It really relies on this technology to build both, a novel privacy solution, where we have kind of, I think, a different approach to privacy that maybe some other projects have had, and also a new approach to scalability through ZK rollups, but not, traditionally ZK rollups have been seen as kind of a layer 2 solution, so an improvement to Ethereum. But there's actually there's some problems with that, and there's a lot of benefits that we can have by kind of building a new solution from the ground up that has sort of native rollups integrated, and yeah, that has a lot of efficiency and scalability benefits. Excellent.
And then in talking about what espresso is designed to do, I mean, we're talking about from my understanding, it's configurable privacy on the blockchain,
right?
I think we talked early on about the potential use cases for that. Obviously, stablecoins, that's a big one, particularly with some of the most recent problems with stablecoins.
Right.
Do you want to maybe?
Yeah. So what I guess we should first explain to the listeners what we mean by configurable privacy. So right now, if you look at kind of the blockchain ecosystem, there's kind of two extremes. So if you look at Bitcoin and Ethereum, these systems actually have, even though sometimes they're touted for privacy, they actually have terrible privacy, right? If I know your Ethereum address, I can just literally go to the blockchain and see all of your transactions. And I can see exactly how much money basically you make, how much, it's like if your bank account was, if you tweeted every little transaction from your bank account. And then on the other hand, we have good, privacy solutions like Monero or Zcash, which make all of your transactions private. And that is good for some use cases. But I think there's a lot of use cases that kind of sit in the middle, where you don't want every single transaction to be fully public, but also maybe you don't need or want, or for regulatory reasons aren't allowed to have full privacy. So the one that you already mentioned are these stablecoins. So stablecoins, and I'm talking about, there's kind of algorithmic stablecoins, and then there's like stablecoins issued by a company, like say Circle or something like that, or PayPal might issue one, or I don't know, one of these, like, and that these stablecoins where the stablecoin issuer. So the way that they work is you give them $1, so you give Circle $1, and you get one USDC, like a digital dollar back, and that then you can do everything with it. But there's a lot of regulation around these stablecoins because it's basically digital money, right? So the US government, for example, has a lot to say about that. And the regulation, for example, says that the stablecoin issuer should be able to view and freeze assets if there's, for example, a subpoena, or if there's a court order. They should be able to do that. And what we enable with kind of the configurable privacy is we enable that you can make these stablecoins private to the public, but then there is a viewing key, or there can be a viewing key. It's optional, it's configurable, and optionally a freezing key, which allows you to view and freeze assets, for example. So you can, the issuer could, if they wanted to, they could view these assets. Or we can even, on top of that, you can distribute the key, the viewing key, if you say, like, well, I don't really like it if there's one issuer that can see all the transactions. That's a reasonable concern. But it's so configurable that we can even split this key amongst many different parties and say that only if they all agree, if they all sign off, then they can view the transactions. So it really is, I think it gives you what we're trying to build is a solution that opens up this entire middle space between full privacy and full transparency, but kind of give you the best of both worlds, which I think is, for example, for these stablecoin applications, we don't have any sort of private stablecoins yet. So this could enable really our goal is to enable the first private stablecoin.
And so I know this popped up on your website in a couple of different places that you're actually working with Circle.
Yeah, we're collaborating with them. We have a lot of talks with them. I think they're really, really excited about this, and really excited to see where this goes.
And I know, like Tether, I remember reading some surprise in the community as to Tether's ability to actually freeze transactions a while ago. And there was some controversy, like, oh, how is it that Tether can do this? Like, are they using a similar methodology?
So freezing is, freezing is very, so it's just built into their smart, so they have a smart contract, and it's built into their smart contract, and they kind of, like, to defend Tether here, this isn't really Tether's choice. I think there's essentially regulation that requires Tether to do this. It requires Tether to have the ability. The way that it works is, so it's very easy, or it's somewhat easy to do this if you have a non-private stablecoin like Tether stablecoin, because you can basically just program it into the smart contract, where you have, like, freezing is just a flag, and then if it's frozen, then you can't, move the money anymore. What makes it, like, what has made this problem challenging for us, but what we've solved, like, this is actually now published and open sourced, and is going to be launched soon on first on a testnet, on the Rinkeby testnet. So what makes this, so you can play around with it yourself, which is going to be really exciting. So watch out for an announcement for that. That's coming soon. So yeah, what made it interesting for us is that we wanted to have, even Tether shouldn't, without using the viewing key, or you can even have a different viewing and freezing key, the public shouldn't know, or there shouldn't be, a table somewhere that says, who has which asset and how much and what is frozen. And the basically what we enable is the ability to freeze, an asset without even, knowing, like, while still retaining the privacy of all of the other users, right? So if you're not being frozen, then you don't, it doesn't even leak how much money you have and whether you have any coins and so on and so forth. So really the goal is to have privacy by default and security by default, and then only in very extreme circumstances, when you, for example, have to require with apply with law enforcement, to still have a solution for that.
Right. Well, for anybody who's ever been through, I'm an attorney, so anybody's ever been through like a cybersecurity hack of a client, you really appreciate the ability to freeze. I mean, all that stuff is, don't touch my coins is great, but then you'll be surprised at how many people like turn around and say, well, hold it, that was then, but right now there's like.
Exactly.
So it does have, it's hard to deny its beneficial uses. And so it's interesting. So Espresso there's a lot of different projects that Espresso is undertaking. And I guess it's sort of like this wide open canvas. Obviously, the privacy component of it and linking it into things like freezing also, as part of that use cases. So one of the big things that you've talked about is the scalability of Espresso, and how probably one of the bigger differentiators of Espresso is this great scalability. And I don't know, maybe you could talk a little bit about, how you've achieved that, and how you see yourself even maximizing on that differentiator. I mean, certainly stablecoins is one way to sort of hit that scalability side of it, but
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we noticed, really this privacy, this customizable asset privacy, we call that CAP or CAPE, customizable asset privacy on Ethereum, because we've deployed this as an Ethereum smart contract. But what we kind of noticed in the process, and we were aware of that before, but really this working on CAPE really drove this home, is that while Ethereum is great, and we're huge Ethereum fans, that kind of for applications like that, for example, use a lot of cryptography, Ethereum just isn't that scalable today. Like, it just doesn't really work, right? Your transaction fees might be in the tens or sometimes even hundreds of dollars, which just for a normal user, like, that's too much. Like, they wouldn't use it. So what we thought is that we can build kind of a separate system which is still linked to Ethereum through a bridge, so is you can really see as still part of the Ethereum ecosystem, but which uses some of the same technology that we're experts in, namely these ZK rollups, or these zero knowledge proofs and these ZK rollups, in order to scale transactions, and maybe even scale things like CAPE, but even then maybe even more generally scale arbitrary Ethereum transactions. And that is what we're now heavily working on. We're working on kind of a first testnet for that. And our approach, I guess the way that our approach differentiates is that, coming back to these rollups, these rollups have one, both ZK and Optimistic Rollups, they have one key limitation still at this point, which is that you can do these rollups, and checking the proof is very simple. But it turns out that there's a so-called data availability attack, which is that if the rollup server inserts some random transactions, then, and doesn't tell the world about it, and it then creates a rollup proof. The rollup proof ensures that all of the transactions are valid, but what it doesn't ensure is that you have afterwards, you basically need some data, some Merkle tree path, but you need some data in order to create the next transaction, in order to create kind of like in order to basically still be able to transfer value, you need some additional information. And what a rollup server could do, if they're malicious, is that they don't release that data, and they basically can hold your money hostage. And the best solution, or the solution that these rollup servers use today, is that basically they need to publish some limited amount, but some data per transaction still on the blockchain. So there needs to be some additional data, that kind of a short summary of all of the transactions that needs to get published on the blockchain. And essentially what this means, why is this a limitation? Well, essentially what this means is that the amount of scaling that you can get through a rollup like that, with so-called on-chain data availability is the term that people use, is limited. It can give you a factor of 10 speed up, but it cannot go beyond that, right? Like it's not even if you have many transactions, there's kind of a limit to, how much speed up it can get you. And if we want to get 100x or 1000x speed up, we kind of need a different solution. And what we found at Espresso, and what we're building, is basically a solution that integrates this data availability. So integrates a solution for keeping this data available so that everybody has access to it, together with the rollup system. So build kind of a highly integrated design there that kind of solves both problems at once, and allows you to get to 1000x speed up, and really kind of unlock the full potential of these CK rollups.
Right. And so for any project, any coin token that's trying to, or even I guess the mainnet, however you want to frame it, they can actually use the cape, your cape, to wrap all their tokens. So they could basically have their whole ecosystem wrapped in your cape.
Exactly. Yeah. So
ecosystem, or really just, it's really token by token, right?
Token, right. So for cape, it's the idea is so for again, right, like this, the two components, there's so for cape, it allows you to wrap tokens, which automatically gives them kind of this one. You can wrap them in a different way, right? It's customizable. So you can choose the color of your cape, basically, and basically decide what kind of privacy you want for this token. Do you want full privacy, like Zcash level privacy? We enable that. Do you want like that there's a viewing key, and that's sort of that brings privacy to all of these different assets. And then once our layer 1 chain is ready, which will enable, like it will be EVM compatible, so you can roll up sort of, and you can use it with any just your normal EVM smart contract. Then we add not just privacy but also scalability to all of your smart contracts and assets. So that's kind of the two-step plan. The privacy part is ready now. Cape is ready now. It's open source, and come talk to us if that is of interest to you. And the scalability part is what we're working on now, and what will hopefully be ready soon. And I think which I'm also very, very excited about.
And so how would you, like, the solutions that you're providing, would you view them as sort of something akin to there's more talk these days about modularity in these blockchain systems? Would you think of some of these, whether the privacy or the scalability combined, would you think those as modular components that, hey, you worry about X and we'll worry about this, we'll handle the scalability and the privacy, or is that maybe the wrong construct?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly, right? Like, I mean, there's, it depends what level of abstraction you use. Of course, there's modularity, and one of the great things about blockchains is that everybody can write a different smart contract, and somehow they still interact with each other, even though like they're written by different people on different sides of the world without knowing each other. Like that is really where a lot of the power of these blockchains come from. And we kind of preserve that. I think then at the lower tech level, especially the scalability, the privacy solution is very modular. The scalability solution, we've actually found that by integrating some of these components, so not trying to do the rollup separately from the consensus system. So there's kind of the consensus, the proof of stake consensus, and the rollup and the data availability. By basically having one solution for all of these three things together, we're able to get a lot of benefits from that. So that's kind of where we maybe broke the modularity and designed one unified system because it had such a benefit, right? I think the danger with these modular systems is that sometimes it works great, and it's a bunch of building blocks and you have a perfect Tetris, and sometimes it becomes more of a Frankenstein, right? Like where you attach different parts and it sort of works together, but at every intersection there's and I'm not not an extremist in either direction. I think just in different situations, different approaches are better.
And so when you, with regards to the scalable solution and privacy, obviously one use case is a stable coin, but what types of projects do you see like leveraging this the most right out the gate, or leveraging it the most? Forget the gate.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I think that the privacy part, I think my personal take is that the current privacy of say like Ethereum is untenable for many real world applications. Like if I'm a business and I want to use the blockchain for any sort of real world applications, whether that is transferring stablecoins or whether that is some sort of token that I've issued or some sort of DeFi, do I really want all of my competitors to see all of my transactions? Right? Is that really what I want? This is worse privacy. If you think about it, this is significantly worse privacy than we have in our traditional financial world, where in the traditional financial world, sure, my bank knows all of my transactions, but my competitors don't, my, ex-partner doesn't, right? All of these, that's, I think we should at least get to the same level of privacy that, we have in the traditional financial world, and Cape certainly enables that and much more. So I think that sort of almost any token, for any application, benefits from the privacy. For the scalability aspect, we've obviously build it in such a way that more I think the biggest benefit comes maybe for more complex smart contracts. So for example, Cape transfers, our own product, Cape Transfers, is something that we, of course, is top of our mind. When we build these smart, when we build our scalability solution. But at the end of the day, we want, we think that sort of, this can really be a scalability solution for all of the things that run now, have high fees on Ethereum, or are hopefully. I think the most exciting applications are always the ones that aren't even possible yet because the transaction fees are just too high, right? It's when email came around, it's not that, it made all the snail mail much faster. It obviously did that as well and made it cheaper, but it just enabled, applications, sending, 1,000 emails a day, for 0 cents that weren't even possible before. So I think, the most exciting applications are always the ones that we haven't even seen yet.
Before I let you go, and I've been testing you on this, jellyfish. Tell us a little bit about jellyfish.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we have at Espresso System is, in order to build this technology, we've built, I think frankly, even if we completely take me out, I think, we can say we're one of the strongest cryptography teams in the entire space. I think we have.
And with you in, then it's a universe, right? Anyway, keep going.
Who knows? But I think we have I lost count, like 5 cryptography PhDs, an incredibly strong team. And, one of the things that we've built is a cryptographic library, with a lot of these tools, for example, using, one of the probably the best implementation of Planck that exists out there. Even implementing a lot of the kind of, there's like different variants of Planck, like hyper Planck and turbo Planck, and we implemented, yeah, I know these
we
names
need more. We need more names.
Exactly. So yeah, some of these improvements that we also came up with ourselves, implemented in Jellyfish, in this library, and in Rust, which seems to be kind of the best language that is being used for these systems. So it's both very safe, it's very fast, and it's open source, and anyone can check it out and use it. And yeah, this kind of a contribution, in this space, you always have to, you build your own project, but like part of what I think you should do and what really helps the space and what makes it so amazing is that you really give back to the space a little bit as well.
So before we break off, anything that I haven't asked you about that maybe I should have, that you want to expand on?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. I think that, this is
I beat you up,
a lot,
right?
to the readers to for the listeners to digest. I think, if any of the listeners can think of exciting applications, my email is benedikt@espressosys.com. It's very easy to find. If you have an exciting application, that you can think of for these systems, or if you have questions, I might be slow to answer, but like, please do feel free to email me. Yeah, I think it's an exciting space, and thank you for educating people on it. I think that's always extremely important.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. I think this was an excellent episode. So, best of luck with Espresso. We'll keep following up with Espresso because I expect great things out of your group. It's very exciting.
Cool.
Thanks
awesome.
so much.
Bye.